Hello and welcome back to another part of our How to Paint series of tutorial videos. If you've been following along with this specific series so far, you'll know that we've been painting the Chaos Sorcerer Lord. I won't try to pronounce that name. Darkfang we will go along with. This is part of the commemorative series, as you can see on the top there. If you were subscribed to Warhammer Plus in the last year, I believe you got it free, quote unquote. You just have to pay for a year's subscription, of course, so not quite free. Now this time we'll be focusing on this little lizard kind of frog guy. He looks a bit like a murloc from World of Warcraft. If you watch the other two parts, you'll see that we painted this little cauldron fellow, kind of a Nurgle beast if I had to guess. Now last time I didn't get to show it on camera because I wasn't sure I was going to do it until I did it, and it just so happened I wasn't recording when I did it, but I went ahead and did a little bit more of the dry brushing with that Nurgling green, and of course our base layer, specifically with the legs there, was the Gistillan green, which if you're a fan of Cadians, you're very familiar with that specific paint. The first part we also did this little fellow, kind of a more coronate model. I still have a little bit of details I want to kind of re-go over, but overall I think he's looking pretty close to a finished product. And of course we haven't done the basing on any of these models yet. And actually I had kind of a plan that I wanted to go with the basing, and it just so happened I was working on some Space Marine models, and I figured I might as well do a little practice run, and it didn't work out quite the way I wanted. So the final part, whenever we get around to it, where we do the Chaos Sorcerer himself, might take a little bit longer to come out, just because there's some new materials I want to order in order to try something new with the base. Some PVA glue, and maybe some, I'm not sure what you call them, the little brush, or like dead bush stick-on things that you can get. I have a pack, but it's the wrong color, so we're not going to use those. But again, we're going to be focusing on our little murloc guy here. Of course, before I recorded, just to save some time, I went ahead and applied a pretty thin layer of our Vallejo surface primer here. Again, I can't recommend this stuff enough. I've been using the same bottle for literally maybe 6-7 months now. It's very effective, it's very cheap, and I still have about, I'd say 95% of that bottle left. So it's very well worth it for the price. I think I paid about 20 bucks for it on Amazon. So you really can't beat that value. It is specifically made for a airbrush, but you can just brush it on with a normal brush if you so choose. And the nice thing about that is that it is thin down enough, you don't really need to do anything else with it. You can just apply it directly to your model. Now we're going to go ahead and start with a decent covering of Abaddon Black here. As always, we don't need perfect 100% correct shading kind of coverage here on our first layer. We're just going to go over it anyway with our main color, which will be, again, that Gistillan green, more of a Nurgle kind of feeling to it. But this is going to act as more of a shade for us. So we're just going to go ahead and get as close to 100% coverage we can. And having some variation with the color, you can see in some areas it's a little bit lighter than it is in others. That's actually kind of the effect we want, because when we do apply our base coat next, it'll give us kind of a natural shading feeling. And we can achieve the same thing with a wash afterwards, whether you use Null Oil or Agrax Earthshade. There's a couple of other ones. I don't know all the names for them off the top of my head at the moment. But if we can get that without, just doing it on the first run through before we add any washes, it'll save us a little bit of time, and I think it tends to look a little bit nicer if we don't need to use a wash in the end. So now that we've finished up our kind of first layer here, you can notice that, I don't know if this is meant to be a bone or what, but he's kind of playing it like a flute. I didn't go over that where I could avoid it with our black, because we're actually going to do that with a lighter color. And doing black underneath and doing a lighter color on top takes quite a few layers if you apply it thin enough. And we really don't want to have to waste the time on that if we don't have to. So we're going to do our best. Excuse me while I knock everything on my desk over. We're going to do our best to avoid kind of getting the darker colors here on that item. And again, our next base color we're using, which is going to be our primary, is our Castellan Green. Cadian fans, where you at? It's actually quite sad. I have a Cadia themed army, but I haven't read any of the books. And I feel like that kind of makes me a bit of a fake fan, if I'm being honest. But man, I really just love kind of the theme of them. You know, the planet broke before the guard did. I think that is awesome. And I have quite a bit of respect for all the other legions, specifically Armageddon, Steel Legion. I think their story's cool. The Valhallans. I'm reading the Cafias Cain novels now, so I'm getting a little bit more respect for them. My absolute favorite, Imperial Guard Regiment. And I know we're doing fantasy here, but I can't help it. I'm going to be talking 40k. It's just, you know, I don't get a chance to talk about it often. Not a lot of my friends really do tabletop, so I'm going to vent to you guys about it. But my absolute favorite is the Gaunt's Ghost. It was actually my first books that I read when I got introduced to 40k. I've read all of them. I absolutely adore them, and I've actually reread most of them several times. Specifically, I read the omnibuses, so I'm not sure the actual names of the individual novels, but right where the Sabbat War really starts, I forget the name of the planet, but it's where Gaunt meets, spoilers, I guess, kind of. They're not huge spoilers, but still, if you guys are wanting to read them and you don't want to be spoiled, just skip ahead a few minutes. It's where Gaunt meets the woman who turns into a certain special someone later on. I can't remember her name though, but that's okay. We're going to keep chugging along here. And again, we've got a pretty decent coverage of our green there, so we really aren't going to have to do another layer of that if I don't see any spots we missed. You'll notice I didn't really get proper coverage on whatever this is on his stomach, and there's kind of a reason for that. If we go back to our box here and we take a look, I can't for the life of me figure out what this is meant to be. And again, we're kind of following as close to the box art as we can here, just for our tutorial video. I don't know what this is. It's painted brown, and like, even on the back here with a little close-up, I don't know. I don't know if that's meant to be part of his skin or whether that's mud or something. So we're going to paint it brown, but it's not going to make sense to me. And here we have Dryad Bark, will be our next color. If I can shake it up a little bit here. And I tend to notice when I'm watching my videos back that opening the paint pots like peaks the microphone for some reason. I'm not doing it close to the microphone. I'm doing it, you know, the same distance away that I am everything else. But for some reason, paint pots just really set the microphone off. So we'll try to avoid doing that. I've kind of been moving it away from the mic when I do that, in hopes of rectifying the situation. And just looking at, I use Audacity to record my mic. It looks like it's not peaking too bad. And so I'm doing some weird angles here. It's equally as weird for you to watch as it is for me to try to paint with. So don't be too alarmed. Don't think that you're missing out on anything, because really I can't see what I'm doing either. And we'll see if we can't get the back here. Again, if you have a part of your model that you can't see when you're trying to paint, odds are you won't be able to see it when you're just looking at it. So don't worry too much about getting it. Alright? It might be bad advice. I should be telling you to make sure you get your model fully covered. But honestly, it's not the end of the world. Don't worry about it too much if you miss something. And when in doubt, You can always go back over it. Alright? Now, being that this is the third part of our series, I haven't talked about it too much, but just as a reminder, if this is for some reason your first time watching, thinning your paints is very important. Just making sure you have a little bit of water mixed in on your brush before you go ahead and apply any of it to your model. You just want to make sure you're doing thin enough layers that not only if you make a mistake you can rectify pretty easily, but also that your paint kind of goes on in one or two kind of thin layers that aren't splotchy, they don't look rough. And you'll notice very quickly, especially once your model dries, that if you have too much paint on your brush or your paint is too thick, it's going to have kind of this rough, bumpy texture. It kind of looks like someone took like crayon and went over your model, is kind of the best way I can describe it. And if you haven't painted before, that's okay. If you're just watching this out of interest or what have you, or maybe you want to get into painting and you don't know what I'm talking about, perfectly fine. Don't worry about it too much. We'll hopefully avoid those mistakes. But if for some reason at some point I do end up putting my paint on too thick, maybe we'll do it on purpose for a tutorial of what not to do or something. You'll see what I'm talking about. And now that we've finished up with the Flayed One Flesh there, I don't think I called out that name when I applied it, so there you are, a nice layer paint, Flayed One Flesh. We're going to move on to, see what else we have here. Actually, I take that back. We're not closing that paint up just yet. We're going to reopen it, and luckily we caught it before I went too far ahead. See if I can't get a smaller brush. But there is kind of these little webs in his spine, kind of spikes here, and we want to make sure we get those as well. So again, make sure we got a little bit of water on our brush, because we don't want this to be too thick, especially because if we are putting it into recesses here and our paint is thin enough, it'll kind of naturally stay within the confines. Even if it spills over a little bit, it'll just fall right back into where we want it. So that's a neat little trick for you. And make sure we get kind of all of them. It's really hard for me to tell, but I don't think there's any webbing after that point. And now we reach the plight of being right-handed. We gotta go at a weird angle, try to get these other ones. That's okay. Again, another trick for you, and I'm sorry if this is you're several videos in and you've been hearing the same things over and over. I just want to make sure that for people watching for the first time, they're getting all of the help they can, all the advice, guidance, whether it's good or bad. Hopefully it's all good. Keeping your hands together while you paint, just making sure there's some contact there. Usually I try to keep it at the palms if I can. And the paint, or the model holder rather, is useful for that. You just have a natural kind of cupping point at the base there. That'll help you kind of steady your not only your hands overall, but also just your brush strokes, and kind of give you a little bit better brush control. And as we see our Flayed One Flesh kind of dry out there, we're kind of noticing that it's really hard to tell that we even applied anything, especially in that bottom one. It's dried so quickly. So we're actually going to wait just a few more seconds and we'll go over it again with another very thin layer. And again, it's always better to have too many thin layers than having too many thick layers, because you can't always take paint off, but you can always add more paint. And if you ever get to the point where you get so far into your model and you ruin something and you think, I need to take this off, or I need to restart, or whatever, you might as well power through and finish it anyways, because you might surprise yourself. But there's no harm in just doing a full IPA bath, stripping it down, and just restarting, right? As long as you don't use anything that's going to kind of harm your model, which there's some stuff out there that will disintegrate your plastic. You want to be careful with that. Always look up what you're using before you use it. There's really no harm in just restarting if you're not comfortable with what you finished, Or maybe you finish some models and it's been a while and you feel like your painting skill has increased and you want to go back and redo some guys. That's perfectly fine as well. The first kind of box set that I bought, not my first models ever. My first model ever was a chaplain, which I made blood angels. But the first box set I bought was a box of tactical marines, 10 dudes, very, very nice little models, especially starting out. They're small enough that you don't really have to worry about detail too much. But I ended up going back, just completely restripping them and repainting them. And I'm still not really proud of how they came out. I haven't really touched them in quite a while, but I feel like I've improved kind of considerably since redoing them. So at some point I will probably strip them again and redo them again. No shame in that. Perfectly normal thing to do. And now that has dried a little bit, you can kind of see that our efforts there have come to fruition. We're going to go back with a little bit of Abaddon Black, and I'm going to try very carefully not to mess this up. And I should be using a smaller brush for this, but we're just going to roll with the punches here. Just going to kind of give him some black little soulless beady eyes. Because again, he is a Eldritch familiar. He is a kind of Nurgly looking demon here. And I imagine he is a soulless little fella. But that's okay. You know, he's trying his best, just like we all are. Especially with painting. We all just try our best. Nobody's perfect. Some people are very close to perfect. I will say that. I've seen many skilled painters throughout my I think I've been into Warhammer for about a year and a half now. I've seen amazing paint jobs since then. And I gotta say, someday I hope to kind of reach the heights of that. But I feel like there's a very long road to travel still. As good as I might seem to be, or as bad as I might seem to be. I consider myself maybe amateur level, slightly above beginner, but not quite there yet. One day though, one day we'll get there. Maybe we'll see it come to fruition as I'm doing these video tutorials. We'll slowly see my rise into the heights of being a great painter. And now we have our dry brush. We are doing a little bit of Nurgling Green, which if you watched the last video, you would have seen already. We're not doing anything different rather than focusing on specific raised areas. Everything is grouped much closer in, so we're just kind of doing a light brushing. If you press down too much, you'll end up getting into the recesses more, and you don't want that. And our guy actually looks like he's about to fall off of our base there, so I might have to add another layer of glue or something afterwards. But hopefully we can be gentle enough that he will stay on. We'll just apply some more paint to our brush. The problem with dry brushing is that once you apply it to your brush, you kind of take away like 90% of it before you put it directly into your model. Just use a paper towel or whatever and rub it off. So it makes it kind of difficult to gauge how much you're putting on your model until you actually start doing it. And if you add too much, which I've learned the hard way unfortunately, it hits you like a brick, right? You go to apply your thin layer and you're used to kind of having to brush over it again and again. And if you have too much, it just kind of goes on all at once, like a normal brush would, or a normal paint would, and it's really just out of nowhere. Now there is a little bit of ways you can get around that. If you have a texture palette, or just like a bit of sprue that you've primed and painted, and you kind of practice your dry brushing on that before you apply it to your model, you can kind of save some headaches there. But I have not done that, so we are just kind of winging it here. And that's okay. That's what this is all about, right? It's a learning experience for all of us. I'm learning that there's much better ways to do things, and I'm also learning that I'm not going to do it. That's alright. Do as I say, not as I do, right? And now we are moving on to our next quick little dry brush color here, which is our Rack White. Try saying that 10 times fast. And once we get most of it off of our brush, we're only going to be using this a tiny bit, and that's just to kind of add a little bit of highlight to our spine here. Just those little spikes on the back. I wanted to call them gills, but that's not what it is. I'm not sure what the technical term is. I'm not like a marine biologist, right? Someone who studies lizards or something. I don't know what they're called. And actually, you can see where I have a little bit too much paint on my brush, like I was talking about a moment ago, and I ended up getting it on that shoulder. So to rectify that, make sure our brush is really dried off. You can't see it, I'm off camera here, I'll show it for you actually with this one. I'm just using a basic plain paper towel, nothing fancy about it. And we will get a little bit of our nurgling back on here. It's kind of hard to gauge how much you're getting on as well. That's a big clump, I don't need that much, please. And we have a ton of it on our brush, if you can see there, if it'll focus. We're just going to rub it into our paper towel in circles and just kind of move away. That way you can tell kind of how light your shade is getting. And once you're satisfied with it, let's go ahead and apply it back to your model. And hopefully that'll fix our little oopsie. That actually works out a little bit. I feel like we could have done some more with that nurgling green anyway, especially on the front here. So that works out in our favor. Sometimes mistakes are hidden little gifts in disguise. You know, happy little accidents, as the late great Bob Ross once said. I've got to say, Bob Ross is one of those painters who just amazes, not because of the kind of skill in his work, which I do think he was a very talented painter. I can appreciate a lot of his work actually, but just in the way that he kind of explained it. And if you do ever happen to do a Bob Ross tutorial for some reason, it's very fun. I highly recommend it. You kind of get through the entire process, and the entire time you're thinking, there's no way this is going to look good, right? And then you get to the final point where you get to the end of the video, and it's like, okay, here's your finished product. It always looks great. Like, you can't mess up a Bob Ross tutorial, and like, it's some sort of magic. Like that man has cast a spell, but it's impressive. And the way he teaches it is just stunning. And maybe one day we'll reach the heights of Bob Ross. We'll be the Bob Ross of Warhammer painting. That's the dream, right? But for now, we're going to focus on our humble little beginnings here. We're going to go back over this bone, I think it is, with our flayed one flesh, and just because we got a little bit of our dry brushing on it, we're going to go over and try not to get it on our froggy man's little fingers there. Yeah, look at that. That's pretty good. And again, very careful. There we are. I think for kind of what we want and where we're at right now, that's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with this little guy. I'm always love to get some dry brushing in. It's probably my favorite technique. I need more dry brush paints, honestly. At some point, I'd like to get a whole bunch more. The sad thing is, if you go on the Warhammer website, which I love Citadel paints, that's kind of my poison of choice. I think the UK line of dry brushing paints is like double the size of what we have here in the US, which makes me a little sad. So at some point I need to find kind of another brand. If you guys have any suggestions for good dry brush paints, throw them out there. I'm always open to trying something new. I've also used Vallejo paints. I don't like them as much, but they're still kind of the second best choice behind Citadel. they're a little bit more affordable. So if you guys are looking for paints to buy, you don't know what to get or what to start with, Army Painter makes some pretty good paints. I can recommend those, and also Vallejo. Either way, for now, this will be kind of our finished product. Again, we're not going to be doing the basing until the final part, where we just do all of them in one go. We'll probably do all of our washes, and everything there as well. So for now, we're going to go ahead and call it. If you guys like this video and you want to see more like it, please like, subscribe, comment if you so choose to. I would much appreciate it. If not, that's okay too. I don't hold anything against you. It's entirely your prerogative, and I just appreciate it if you decide to, or even if you don't. I appreciate you either way. Humble listener. Either way, thank you guys very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.